Hello, this is DIY Reptiles, and today we are going to be talking about the mourning gecko. Now, the mourning gecko is a parthenogenic species, which means that all of what we have in captivity are females, and they produce clones essentially, and they're really interesting, very small gecko that is really fun to keep, and they're really popular, and they're also known as like the lesbian gecko because they participate in some form of like mating ritual before they'll lay eggs, even though they are all female, and that's just to stimulate them or something like that. At least that's what is thought. And as far as I know, I guess there are possibly males in the wild for this species, but so there is some type of genetic diversity within the wild, but just in captivity. They're all females, and they're really cool because if you have two or more, then they'll basically breed really readily, and it's kind of just the gift that keeps on giving. Now, I do not own mourning geckos, but I've done a lot of research on them, and I want to keep them, so I'm setting up a jar so then it is well grown in by the time I eventually get mourning geckos. Now, I did say jar. Today I'll be setting up a jar for mourning geckos, and that is because they are simply so small that when they're younger, a jar is perfectly suitable for them. And even as an adult, they don't need anything bigger than like a 5 gallon or like less even. They're just really, really small. And if you want to keep a group of them, then you want to go with like a 5 gallon or bigger or something. And I'm obviously then I want to keep a group. So I'm starting off just I'll have a jar available. So if I ever can get them as babies or even adults, then I'll have something to put them in, and then I can move them up as they go. They're really cool. They eat like crested gecko diet as well as really small insects. So I breed red runner roaches and dubia roaches, which might be a little bit too big for them. But I also breed buffalo beetles, so I have like tiny little mealworms that I can feed them if they, want that. And then also I have like a ton of different types of gecko diet because I feed a variety of things to my crested geckos and my day gecko. So this is what this is going to be, and I still have the jar and everything. I just haven't had the opportunity to get them. I'm looking to buy some on Craigslist. I've seen them at expos, or I've gone to a expo and I've looked out for them, and it was like $80 for like one, or maybe $80 for two, or something like that. And on Craigslist, I've seen them anywhere from like $10 to $15. The problem is it's just like an hour or two away, which, well, it's like 2 hours away, which is a far drive, especially when I generally have to go with my father. So he won't really want to do that. But I've seen them in Columbus, which I live about an hour away from Columbus, Ohio, and that would be most ideal. So if I see them available in Columbus again, then that's what I will go ahead and get them, because they breed very prolifically, and people like to keep them, and they can be kept with dart frogs, and they're just really cool. And they also, when they lay eggs, they lay them attached to things, which is really cool. They generally lay 2 eggs that are like glued to glass or something like that, which is really neat. And overall, I just want to work with a species this small because it would be really cool. They wouldn't be very hard to keep. I already have everything I need to keep them, and I just think they'd be really awesome to work with. But I just haven't had I haven't found them available on Craigslist in a way that is convenient to me. So once I will, then I will get them, and I will have a jar for them. And that's this video. So this jar will make like a good nursery for the species because the babies are just too small to be kept in like a properly sized tank. So likely I'll end up buying babies, and then I'll grow them out in this tank, and that's what this is for. So I'm adding some landscaping mesh onto the clay balls at the bottom of the jar to make a proper drainage layer, and then to separate out the soil. And then I added a piece of window screen mesh on top of that to kind of hold it down. before I go ahead and add in the soil. And then I wanted to add in some cycled soil. So I took some from my bearded dragon tank and just put that in there because it had lots of things that the isopods and everything can break down, and it was just easier to do that. Plus, it was kind of newer soil, so there weren't really isopods in this part of the soil yet, but there probably were springtails, so I wanted to move over some springtails, and that's what I had available as far as a soil mix, so that's what I added in. And that's why it's taking me forever, because I kind of had to just get down into the 55-gallon that my bearded dragon was currently in. Okay, so this gecko species is really small, as I said. It's tropical, and you can keep it basically in the same temperatures as crust geckos, like more towards room temperature, and by room temperature I mean like 70, like between like 70 and 80 degrees. That's like my room temperature is generally around there, between at least like 65 and like 85. Like that's like the range that my room goes, but it's generally towards like between 70 and 80, and that's because I have a ton of like reptile lights in my room and it stays pretty warm. Now, not everybody's room temperature is that. Some people keep it like 65 degrees. That's going to be too cold for the species. So these girls live for about 10 to 15 years. Their adult size is only like 3 to 4 inches. When babies, they're like 1 inch, which is crazy because crust geckos are born like 3 to 4 inches. So that's why I want to keep these, because they're so small. And generally, you can buy them for between like 10 and like maybe towards like $60 or $80. Like that's kind of the range there. And they're relatively affordable compared to other things, and especially since you only need 2, and then you'll eventually have more. That's just like how it'll work. And you can keep one alone, but as far as enclosure size, like a 5-gallon is suitable for 2 adult geckos, a 10-gallon is suitable for 5 adult geckos, and a 25-gallon is suitable for about 10 adult geckos. And these geckos do perfectly fine housed together, and since they're all female, then there shouldn't be too much like infighting or anything like that. And then as far as food, like I said, crust gecko diet is fine, whether like Zoomed, Repashy, or Pangea. I have all 3 because different crust geckos that I keep like different things, because most of them are rescues. So I will probably just end up feeding them Pangea whenever I do get them. And then you can also feed them insects. Like I said, they like flightless fruit flies, just like you would feed to dart frogs. Also, like other normal things like very small crickets, and just like any insect, like feeder insect that's just very, very small and more towards their size. And this is I think an Indonesian species. They're from the coastal regions of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And that is pretty much it. They're relatively easy to keep, and you just keep them like crust geckos, just a lot smaller. So that's overall why I want to keep this species. It's really not all that different than just like taking care of baby crust geckos for me, because that's what I already do. And overall, they just seem like a really easy species to keep, so I wanted to get a tank cycled for them if I eventually end up getting them and breeding them, because I like to work with geckos that I can produce. I already produce the crest geckos. I have a day gecko now currently, which you guys will see videos about that, and I want to get another one so that I can start producing day geckos, and then mourning geckos, and also I want to work with gargoyle geckos. But mourning geckos are something reasonable for me to keep and produce and such. And you keep them humid, just like you would with crust geckos. So like 60 or 70% humidity, so rather humid, and then that'll fluctuate or whatever. And it's just very similar to keeping crust geckos, in my opinion. And some people keep them with like UVB and maybe like a hotspot, but people do the same thing with crust geckos. So like with my room, it's relatively warm in here. It's like I said, like higher 70s generally, in the enclosures where they are, and then like there's a temperature gradient from like the height of the room to the bottom. The floor is normally like 70 degrees, and I know that because I used to try to incubate eggs. Anyway, like towards the bottom of the floor, or on the ground, or like under things or whatever. But that is why I want to keep this species, and that's why I think they're an awesome species to keep and to breed, because they're really not that hard to keep, and they breed really readily, and they just sound fun, and they're lesbian, which is great. So if you're interested in these, I hope this video helped. Like I said, I also set up 5 gallons in like the exact same way. It's really not that big of a deal to just go ahead and set it up. And here's the jar. Did I even show planting it? I'm not sure, but it's been going for a while. And it has a ton of wandering Jew growing in it. And then it has some moss that's been doing well. That's just native collected moss that I kind of made sure I didn't bring anything over. And then there's a bit of creeping Jenny right there, and some spider plant. And pothos would do well in here, but because pothos is simply just so gosh darn big, especially when it gets all nice and humid like this, it's just going to get way too big. So, and then I just have this on it. Now, probably like once I get the geckos, I should probably drill, or not drill, but like make tiny air holes, but even still, it just stays very humid and I don't have to like spray it down really. And then I trim the wandering Jew back, and then I just plant it again, and that's why it's just filled this entire tank. And then I just have one little piece of wood in here, and once one's in here, then it can hide back behind there without any issues, and it can hide among the foliage and everything, especially when they're babies, because like it's an inch long, so it's just, this is gonna work perfect for it. And then once they're bigger, I have 2 of these 5-gallon tanks like this, which is in the thumbnail. And this keeps like baby crust geckos in it, or smaller crust geckos. You can see one right here, just chilling out. And it works well for them. And with this tank, I made a little top for it out of plexiglass and wood, in a similar way that I made the fronts of the crust gecko tanks, except this is just plexiglass that I had laying around. And if I wanted to, or what I'll probably end up doing if I ever do properly get the geckos, I'll probably take this tank and set it up vertically, and then make this a door and like attach little hinges and like a proper lock and things, and then I will use it that way, because like with this just sitting here, they're so small that they can really escape out of anything. Like here I have another tank, another 5-gallon tank, and it has a like a normal reptile lid or whatever, and I'm pretty positive they would be able to get out of this. Like babies definitely, adults maybe, because they are just so tiny. So this would not be good. And it has some, I attached on some plexiglass so it stays nice and humid in here. There's 3 crust geckos in here, like just small baby ones, because it's just one of the grow out tanks. But this would also work for mourning geckos. So I don't know what I'll end up doing, but if I ever do that, then I'll either set them like this, or like make it vertical, like how I have these crust gecko tanks, just like on a much smaller scale. So, and even like something like this, like you could go as big as, like some people will keep them in like 30-gallon exoterra tanks, 18 by 18 by 24. Is that right? Wait. Yep, 18 by 18 by 24. Which, when you do that, you need to make sure that the back things are closed like very tightly, and even you might want to fill some stuff with like something to make sure, because there's certain areas that they might be able to get out. So you just have to be careful with that. Personally, I think this is kind of huge though, but maybe I'll end up with a tank like this, or a tank like a larger tank for mourning geckos if I ever do keep them. And it just kind of depends on how many I have as adults, and then how many I produce just to sell. So I don't know. We'll kind of see when we get there and make decisions off of that. But I mean, I'm excited to potentially get them, but I just haven't been able to find somebody that's close enough to get them from for what I find to be a reasonable price. And I wish there was somebody that I could trade crust geckos for, because I'd be totally down to do that. But nobody has reached out to me with that offer, unfortunately. So, but that is this video, and I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope you found it helpful, especially if you're looking to set up mourning geckos, or if you just learned about mourning geckos. But they're a really cool species that I plan to get, and I recommend, even though I don't keep them, but I can't imagine they're too different than these species that I already keep. So hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, like it down below. If you have any comments or concerns, comments below, and if you want more content, then subscribe.